What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back to the 3 Idiots Talking podcast. Today we have a special little video for you guys. We are going to be reacting to Mr. Anthony Fantano, aka the Needle Drops, Radiohead worst to best discography or studio albums ranking. So as you guys probably, if you're here on this music channel or have ever watched a music review video on YouTube, you've heard of Anthony Fantano, aka the Needle Drop. Very famous YouTube music reviewer, probably the most famous there is. He put together a Radiohead worst to best video, and we just finished our personal going through each Radiohead studio album ranking, and we put together our own worst to best, the list at the very end of that. You guys can go check that out. It was on our previous video, but we're going to react to his and see what we agree with, disagree with, and where he stands.
He's a Radiohead enjoyer.
A Radiohead enjoyer.
Okay. Are you having a hard time breathing? I'm having a hard time breathing. It's here. It's real. Hi, everyone. It's Tomthony York Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for another installment of our worst to best series. Go.
Number 9, the King.
All right, we can stop right now.
Bad. Wow.
Okay.
Okay.
Really?
Little surprising.
Really?
Yes, for me, The King of Limbs is Radiohead's worst album. And sure, while it may not be as dated or as corny as some of their debuts' worst moments, it lands at this spot for a few reasons. One, the band's attempt at doing a full record where they try to blatantly fuse experimental rock and electronic music just fell flat on its face. The result was a bunch of unexciting, passionless performances that sound like they really should have been left to be forgotten on some Tom York solo effort. And two, in the grander scheme of Radiohead's discography, this album just seems so insignificant and so surprisingly short. The musical risk the band took on this record didn't really pan out. It's not a sound they ended up perfecting down the road. I mean, the closest they came to perfecting what they were doing on The King of Limbs was actually the live version of this album, which is infinitely superior.
We heard this a lot when we were ranking this album. The live from the basement version of this was, so many people told us that the King of Limbs live in the basement was way better. Almost every song was way better. So I guess I'll give credence to that this one was probably at a better live version than a studio. Haven't heard it though.
To the studio album itself. In the end, The King of Limbs to me just kind of seems like a weird detour they embarked on that they didn't really end up committing fully to, at least not enough to put out a complete, satisfying album. And considering what they were doing on their next record, it just doesn't seem like an essential part of the band's evolution. At least not as essential to their evolution as their debut.
That really just feels like trying to be different. There is no way that Pablo Honey is better than King of Limbs. It is so incredibly just... nothing unique about it. Every contemporary was superior. He was calling King of Limbs uninspired. Then what does that make Pablo Honey? And he says that King of Limbs was like essentially their least important album. In reality, that's probably Pablo Honey. Pablo Honey's he's only saying that because Pablo Honey was their debut. That shouldn't really dictate, where you place it on a list or anything like that. I feel like it's pretty obvious that Pablo Honey's their worst album, but you go, reviewer man.
Okay, I'll say this, and you know what? There's no reason to keep a tally here, but I was gonna say we could count in your heads the amount of times you agree or disagree with Fantano here. But I was gonna say right off the bat, obviously I had this at number 8 in my personal rankings. If you guys watched it at the end of the studio rankings, there is a strong consideration for this to be their worst, considering how much they had already made that was great before this, and how much experience and money production wise that they could have poured into this, especially given that the time they had taken from the previous album to make this. So I can understand, and totally I'm hearing out his argument for why this is it, but the actual quality of the music is just lower on Pablo Honey. It's just straight up lower. I mean, you can talk about, oh, they had way more time and money and production and talent. They've experienced all these other things throughout. Sure, but the music still is worse on Pablo Honey. It just is. Cole, did you have any counter argument to Fantano, or do you agree with him?
No, I put Pablo Honey at 9. I think it's a decent amount worse than the King of Limbs. There's nothing about Pablo Honey that I really like. There's no song on Pablo Honey that I would even give like higher than a 6 probably. I don't remember what I gave every song, but I actively dislike that album a great deal. The King of Limbs is mostly just boring to me, so I do agree with like all of his criticisms towards the King of Limbs, but I do feel like how dated and generic and bland Pablo Honey is and how bad the lyrics are do trump the fact that the King of Limbs is, you know, really uncreative and, you know, all the criticism that he had for it. I do think that it trumps that.
All right.
Obviously he disagrees, but
All right, 3
whatever.
disagrees to start. Let's see
It's
what
not
he's
the
got
end of the
for-
world.
So essentially,
Pablo Honey. And it's not hard to see why. It may have been a perfectly acceptable alternative rock album in the 90s when it was released, but it has not aged all that well over the years. Even the album's biggest track, Creep, has become a joke among Radiohead fans, among the hardcore fans, as being the entry-level Radiohead. That's the Radiohead song everyone knows, that anyone can enjoy. Yes, only Radiohead fans would create a massive running joke about the band's music being too accessible. And that's a lot of the reason why I think Pablo Honey gets so much unjust hate, because Radiohead fans are too busy glorifying Kid A and OK Computer as some kind of like gold standard of music, like they're the most experimental, groundbreaking albums of all time, and something like Pablo Honey, oh, that's just pedestrian. When in reality, the biggest sin that Pablo Honey commits is that it just had a lot in common with its contemporaries. Sure, the album is a little generic, but Ripcord and How Do You Do and Anyone Can Play the Guitar are perfectly fine alternative rock songs. In my opinion, it's not their worst record. It's perfectly respectable as a 90s rock album and as a formative moment in the band's career.
Okay. Oh, wow. All right. I keep hating how he automatically puts up. I wanted to respond directly to this because there was something I heavily disagreed and heavily agree with. I heavily disagree when he was talking about like, oh, when he's being very, and this one problem I have with Fantano, he's a very to fan bases, he's extremely I guess judgmental of how the fan bases treat albums, especially ones they dislike or like really hard. Like he was trashing fans of Radiohead for saying OK Computer and Kid A are just so great and out experimental and blah blah blah. And I would say
he's not wrong.
I would say that fans showing up love for some of the favorite albums, and I don't want to talk about this the whole time, but fans showing up love for some of their favorite albums versus some of the worst albums is just showing that you have gone through their discography enough to know what's really good.
That's not what he said. That's not what he said.
Sort of what he said, essentially.
It's not what he said. He was making fun of them for calling OK Computer and Kid A like super out there and wildly experimental when they're not particularly all that experimental.
I said this
one, that they're trying to make.
I don't want to argue about the future albums like we did previously because we already went through them, but I said it multiple times. They are far more experimental than you give them credit for. But the one thing I heavily disagree or heavily agree with him is Pablo Honey gets a lot of trash from hardcore Radiohead fans. It gets called generic, it gets called boring, it gets called too easily accessible by the general populace. It gets said, they say, well, when you get to the better albums, it sounds nothing like this. Like, yeah, no shit. They changed their sound. So did some of the greatest bands of all time. Everyone can do it. It's not like you have a Creep, which is one of the most popular songs of all time, and the band openly trashing it, I think is like personally really stupid that you got a large majority of your fan base coming from one album and then you just trash that album every chance you get because you're like, well, this album was generic and boring. It's like, you made the damn thing. Okay? You're allowed to have your opinion, but your fans are allowed to have their opinion too, especially ones who do like that album. So calling it bad because you think it doesn't sound like what your future stuff is going to sound like, it's pretentious as fuck.
Well, I think they look back on it negatively because of how poorly it aged.
Yeah, it's aged like
I agree.
milk.
It aged
that
poorly.
Sounds like crap now.
But it's overhated. It's certainly overhated. Even though I put it at the lowest.
It's properly disliked.
I think it's pretty accurately disliked.
I think I gave it like a 6 at the lowest, or 5.
I think I gave Pablo Honey a 3, which it deserves. That album is cringy.
All right. Well, number 7, he has Amnesiac.
such an overrated
Okay.
Right?
album. Don't get me
Right?
wrong. There's some perfectly fine songs and some amazing ideas on Amnesiac. But this album is essentially a glorified set of Kid A afterbirths. And
That's true.
while
What?
it's well known that the material here
Yeah.
was recorded in the same session as the material on Kid A, don't let that trick you into thinking it's just as good, especially when you have blatantly unfinished and repetitive tracks
No.
all over the
No.
track
Yes.
listing here.
No.
The song
Yes.
Hunting
Yes.
Doors is just a guitar
Absolutely.
detour. The song
Yes, it is.
Pull Revolving Doors is just like a
It's actually kinda
mind-numbing
cool.
electronic interlude that doesn't
Actually
reinforce
kind of a cool song.
much of anything the album has
It's actually one of
before or
the best
after
songs
it.
on
You
that
and
album.
Whose Army sounds
No.
like some
You
kind
didn't
of
even
demo
like it.
ballad that Tom strung together that just had
Oh,
like a big
stop.
climactic string section tacked onto the end of it to make it sound finished. And even one of my favorite tracks on here, Morning Bell, starts like I've been teleported into a track that has already been playing for 2 minutes. This album constantly gets built up for being
That's a
more
weird
abstract
criticism.
than Kid A,
That's
but
funny.
only in the sense that the songs are dodgier and more obscure. In my opinion, if we're to go on the sound and the music of this album in comparison with Kid A, what happens on Amnesiac is way less adventurous, with the exception of the kind of jazzy finish the band tries to pull off at the end. I do like Life in a Glass House, though, and some of the band's best material is on this thing.
That's
Knives
such
Out
a
is
fucking
chillingly
weird-
beautiful. The groovy Desert Rock on I Might Be Wrong is actually pretty fantastic. And Pyramid Song, while that track is pretty redundant and does feel like an extended motif like many other tracks on here, the track is just too emotionally potent and it has too great a chord progression to just deny it.
All right, I don't know when he's gonna get to his next one. Okay.
I'm not denying that there are beautiful and haunting moments on this record. I'm not. It's just that despite the fact that it runs at about the same length many other Radiohead albums do, it's one of the band's most rickety releases.
So
That's true.
let's just say one thing he got entirely wrong, in my opinion. This is not just throwaway songs, okay? It's not just
At least
you-
half of
you
it is
called
just
it-
unfinished stuff from Kid
you
A.
you both call this Kid A side B that should have probably stayed down, and it's wrong. While it may have been recorded during Kid A sessions, it was recorded over the length of over a year, and that is a very long time for them to get things better. Are some of them unfinished? Absolutely, but the majority of this album is finished. Sounds a lot like Kid A, has emotional depth like Kid A does, and uses a lot of the same things that Kid A with a couple little more jazziness, like he mentioned. I think this has it's a very fulfilling album that just doesn't reach the potential that Kid A did.
But there's so many songs on it that just feel completely underwritten, though. And I agree,
Not
it
so
does
many.
sound. There's several. There's probably like 5 or 6 songs that are just not even finished. And yeah, I agree that a lot of it does sound like Kid A, and because it's kind of where they were, but like Kid A songs that are not fully realized.
Noah, did you have
Which
a point
was-
you wanted to make?
My critique
Oh,
when we
yeah.
listened to the album.
Though I fully agree with where he put it, and I agree. I agree that. This is probably their most inconsistent album since Pablo Honey. It does have songs that feel incredibly unfinished or unneeded, with like Hunting Bears.
Yeah, Hunting
Did we
Bears
need
was. No, we did not.
Thank
There
you.
are some songs that didn't need to be on this. I agree.
I don't agree with him really going in on songs like You and Whose Army and a little bit on Pyramid Song, but overall he got the point across and he put it in the proper place. So good
Big
for you.
problem I have here is that he has not mentioned "Hail to the Thief" in the first 3, and that album is one of the 3 worst Radiohead albums by far. So this
No.
is too low. This
I
album
don't
is
know
too
about
low.
that.
This should be a top. We have the Bends at 6.
So true.
Benz.
God, I'm probably
I have a
the
bit of a
lower.
love-hate relationship with this album. I appreciate it and respect it as a significant moment of progression and evolution in the Radiohead discography. It's certainly a more unique listen than Pablo Honey. It is one of
Yes.
Radiohead's most consistent and solid, well-built records. I think the band
Consistent?
successly blends alternative rock
Yeah,
with art
it is.
rock on this album.
No art
Also, in
rock on
comparison
it.
with
I don't
Pablo
get
Honey,
that at all.
Tom York is a
Yeah, a
much
little
more
bit.
captivating frontman. The mix is fuller, the
not
mix
yet.
is richer, the band just sounds heavier and more powerful.
What?
But I just don't see the Bends as interesting as what the band would be doing down the road. A lot like Pablo
true.
Honey, the more years that go by, the less significant the album seems to my ears.
God,
Because
yes!
this album, even though it is
Yes!
more cutting edge than Radiohead's debut, it's still packed with so many alt-rockisms that
Yes.
are growing
Rockisms.
staler and staler and staler. Case in
Absolutely.
point, the title track. And there are
Absolutely.
at least a handful of songs on here where it just sounds like Radiohead is coming through with like this real sense of swagger. Like what they're doing on this album is just so ahead of the curve and so deep, and I just don't feel like that's the case. In a way, I do prefer Amnesiac's haunting ambience. I do prefer Pablo Honey's rawness, how unassuming that album is in comparison with the Bends, but I do think the Bends is a more significant point in the band's career.
Okay. All right. I think we got his point. Noah, you seem to be
Absolute
the one
fire.
to
Just
disagree.
spitting
You
facts.
seem to be the one to disagree the most.
How is this better than how is this worse than Hail to the Thief?
Oh, it's significantly weaker than Hail
Hail to the Thief. God, that album's
This is better
so
than Hail to the Thief.
that album's so inconsistent.
Nope, I'd way rather listen to Hail to the Thief than the Bends.
I would not, because there's such good songs like Fake Plastic Trees, High and Dry, Street Spirit. There's so many good songs on it. This is them doing alt rock and it actually aging well and being a really good album.
Lord,
Though,
it is not aging well.
I only have it one spot higher at 5, but there's no reason it should be below Hail to the Thief.
Well, I have a question. He mentioned art rock. I wonder if he meant alt rock when he said art rock, because there's no art rock on this album, so I don't know what he was talking about with that.
I wouldn't consider any of the Bends to be art rock
at all.
I barely even consider them to be much art rock on OK Computer.
What I was gonna say, the main criticism I have is they're still trying to find their sound on this album. That's why it didn't come across as finished, or not finished, but didn't come across as where there's still a lot of issues. He mentioned Tom York's vocals and him becoming that lead frontman. I don't think he's there yet on this album at all. I think he's got a little bit of progress. OK Computer is when he really takes that step and becomes that lead frontman guy. He's still working on it. It's not there yet, and I mentioned that when we did the Benz review, is that it doesn't fit. He's not that guy yet. The band as a whole is not that band yet. I mean, they just haven't found the sound that they're gonna become famous for. Even though Creep was huge and Pablo Honey was a big album because of Creep, this is not the sound they will become critically famous for yet. And it has really elements, but it's not there yet, and it's got a long ways to go from here. But OK Computer is the next leap up. But yeah, no, I disagree with this. This is too high for him. He has this at 6, I believe. I think I had this at 7. Yeah, 7.
God,
so
that's awful.
I think it's pretty. I mean, I this is either like the third. This is probably the third weakest Radiohead album to me.
Yeah.
I damn near agree with every word he just said. I mean, I don't think this album is anywhere near as good.
6. You have it at 7.
Yes, I know,
Okay.
but that wasn't a word that he said about it.
Fair enough.
I would put Amnesiac over it because Amnesiac is better.
Hail to the
A lot
Thief.
of fans and music writers label
I knew he was
Radiohead
gonna do
as
that.
the band that
Way too
defined the
high.
2000s. And if that is the case, Hail to the Thief was probably their least definitive moment of that decade. And not that I think it's a terrible album. Some of my favorite Radiohead songs are on this album. 2 + 2 = 5 is one of the best introductions to any Radiohead album, period. The explosive second half of this track is amazing, and it's just interesting to see the band kind of evolve past the eeriness and just the abstraction of Kid A and Amnesiac and head in a direction that's more aggressive and groovier, more physical. And the ballad on the song A Wolf at the Door is probably one of the most heart-wrenching moments in the band's entire career. The issue with this album is, as many people in the past have stated, is that it's just kind of inconsistent and a little bloated, while the very cold and calculated backdrifts is a better attempt at just trying to make electronic music than many moments on The King of Limbs. The track doesn't really do anything to support or reinforce the songs that surround it. And the weird, densely packed rhythms and vocals and synths on the back end of Sit Down, Stand Up stands as one of the most questionable production choices of any song in the band's career, or most genius, depends on how I'm feeling that day. I think there are a lot of great sounds and
Can't say that's
ideas
so pretentious.
on Hail to the
That's
Thief.
you.
It's just that
No,
the band
it's
doesn't really
not.
perfect
That
them
is.
Say it all the time.
refine them here. They just kind of end up doing that later in their discography on records like A Moon-Shaped Pool and In Rainbows. I could pull a lot of tracks out of this album individually and say, great track, amazing track, fantastic track, but there's just very little rhyme or reason to it as an album, and Radiohead's usually pretty good at coming through with a well-groomed, well-conceived, well-flowing album.
Okay, I think we get his point. It's very inconsistent. It's very bloated. He mentioned those things. I'll say his description of the album is fairly accurate. I would agree with most things he said about it. Inconsistent, bloated, didn't have a whole lot of... you can pick and choose different songs that are good, but most part it doesn't really can stay like that. I'll give him credit for that. I think he nails the description of this. His ranking is terrible though. I don't know how you can say that this album is is better than the previous few he just put up at number 5 when you can essentially just pick apart this album entirely, and like every single like 5, 6, 7 different songs are worse than the majority of what's already passed. How is that better when the last few albums were more consistent than this one? I don't get that.
They're
I
not
guess
that consistent.
overall, I'll disagree with his ranking. I'll agree with his description though. Cole, Noah, you have anything to add?
Yeah. For the most part, I agree with everything he said. I think the placement's wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, Hail to the Thief is maybe like my second least favorite Radiohead album to listen to front to back, just based off of the lack of cohesion. And I feel like that alone should put the Benz over the top of it.
Okay. Cole, you're shaking your head.
More
Hail
consistent.
to the Thief has way better songwriting than the Benz does. Better
Debatable.
lyrics.
Debatable.
It's a way more compelling
It
album.
does have better
Nope.
lyrics.
Oh, the Benz is
Compelling
more
is
compelling.
not. No, the Ben's
Nah.
probably slightly more compelling. I mean, this is like 8, 9 or 8, 7 for me, I think.
I think 5 is probably right for Hail to the Thief.
Actually,
That's
6 is
way
right.
too high. Wow. Okay. First one I've actually entirely agreed with the placement of. A Moon-Shaped Pool 4.
Yeah, A Moon-Shaped Pool. It's super new. It's super new.
It's not.
But the more I listen to this thing,
This is
the
not
more
recorded
it
recently,
feels like
Ryan.
a really significant part in Radiohead's discography. The more it feels like one of the band's most cohesive and conceptual albums. And while sure, it's their most low-key record, it's their most subtle record, don't let that distract you from the fact that it is one of their most beautiful albums too. One of their most fully realized albums. One of their most elegant albums. I think Radiohead stirs some great emotional power on this album. It's just that power is just so quietly displayed. It's not painfully obvious. But I love the way that this album just serves up all of these sad, spacey, transcendent tunes. I think also on this album, Tom flexes his muscles as a more lyrically direct songwriter, whether it be on the closing track where he's kind of lamenting the loss of a really important romantic relationship, or on the song Burn the Witch, where the band is really kind of taking a direct shot at the modern state of socio-political discourse, just kind of fallen into the trash. Also, I just cannot get over the creepy alien story going on the track after.
I'm gonna go to the I'm going. That's what
it's not. He's not that vindictive.
Could have never mentioned that shit to him.
Uniform eeriness and again, kind of a very vast atmosphere to this entire album. But there's actually a lot of musical variety to this record. There are moments that take on more of a folk rock flavor. The track Full Stop, one of my favorite Radiohead songs, period, has a bit of a krautrock vibe to it. The tension they build on this track is amazing. Not only is this album a great listen throughout, but also a fantastic return to form, considering the record that preceded it.
Okay, I get his points. I don't want to see the next one before we get there. Yeah, I for the most part, I completely agree with the ranking. Very recency bias because we literally just did this one yesterday. And I only heard it one time, and I gave it a 9 off first listen. I almost put it in my top 3 when we did it, but I think keeping it outside of the ones that I've already heard a ton more and still rank really high is probably smart. I agree with most part of everything he said. It's a very emotional, very powerful record. Problem is, I think it does have inconsistencies as well. Like a little bit, a small amount of inconsistency there with like some of them are like nines, 8.5s, 9.5s, and then we got a couple dips like to a 7, 7, 6.5, a couple different times. And the band probably had a little bit too much bloat in it as well. I don't know if
No.
it. Nope. Okay. No, it just disagrees off the bat.
Yeah, I do disagree. This is at number 3 for me.
Okay.
I guess it might just come down to preference, but I enjoy it and think this is a better album than OK Computer.
No.
In my opinion, it's more consistent.
Ridiculous.
It's more beautiful. It's more well written.
Being more beautiful
And
does not make you a better record.
Well,
Depends.
that's just an aspect of it.
Okay.
I think it's more well written. I like the lyrics on it a lot more too. It does more for me.
Maybe.
The songs on OK Computer feel more fully realized.
Disagreed.
All right.
I think they're equally realized.
No,
I just like the actual songs on
And-
DJ Pool more.
There's way more highs on OK Computer than
Yes.
Moonshaped Pool.
I was gonna just get to that.
It has much
100%.
higher peaks.
I gave one song on
No, it
Moonshaped Pool a 10, and I'm not sure I would. If I listened to it again, I'm not sure I would, but I did give it on first listen. But OK Computer is like 3 10s. So
Okay, settle down.
You're wrong on both accounts. There's no 10 out of 10 songs on a Moonshaped Pool,
Yeah,
and
there
there's
is.
one on OK Computer.
wow. I agree.
I don't.
Back to
Kid
back.
A, the legendary Kid A, Radiohead's
Wow.
official,
I'm surprised to
bold,
see that.
line in the sand transition from making some alt rock and some art rock to just going experimental rock, working in some
don't really
crazy
think it's
electronics
experimental
too,
rock.
basing their songs on more abstract
Outside of maybe
structures,
one
and beginning
song.
to incorporate in their music a chilling ambience that would remain with them for pretty much their entire career afterwards. Few bands undergo such an overhaul in their sound and come out on the other end this successful. And even though I have long said that Radiohead is not one of the most experimental, adventurous bands on the planet, the very obtuse songs that they present here on Kid A, they're not for the impatient, because this thing is
That's true.
dystopian, it's dark, it's... The song National Anthem is probably the easiest on the ears Radiohead gets on this record, but even that track is
Optimistic
loaded
is
with
the
tinny,
most.
strange vocal effects and a horn freak out at the end. The song Optimistic probably contains
good.
one of my favorite vocal performances
Yes.
from Tom. I also love the very surreal and kind of psychedelic In Limbo. The IDM influence
Hell
on
yeah.
the track Idiotech is awesome
Idiotech
and so
is so
incredibly
good.
icy. And the song Motion Picture Soundtrack is very lullaby-esque, and
It's cool.
with its
Overrated,
kind
but
of a
cool.
That's
very
probably the easiest on the
relaxing
ears.
pump organ
Probably.
chords and harp runs, it's easily one of my favorite finishes of any Radiohead album. If anything holds the album back in the grander scheme of Radiohead's
One of his
discography,
worst
I don't
takes right
think
here.
it has the best flow from track to track of
Absolute
any Radiohead album.
malarkey.
The ambient interlude
Crackhead
Treefinger
stuff.
still kind of stands
That's
out to me
false
as,
statement.
you know,
It
just a
definitely
really
was.
odd detour on the record
It's
that doesn't necessarily
beautiful.
logically flow from the preceding track. And even the songs on here that do complement each other seem kind of isolated and compartmentalized, maybe in a
thought my
way that's
computer was
kind of an
spazzing.
artistic comment on how in a vacuum the album itself feels. But regardless, I do think it does harm the album, even if just a little bit. For sure, I could see why this album would be the favorite among many Radiohead fans. It's just not the case for me, though.
All right. Cole.
I feel like it's their one of, if not their most cohesive album that they've ever made. I don't understand that at all. All the songs feel so connected to me. It stays within its sound so much more than I think all other albums outside of maybe OK Computer. To me, it's the most consistent Radiohead album easily. And it's my favorite one to just listen to, although I feel like it has like the best flow. I don't understand where he's getting these takes.
So the one thing I was gonna give Kid A was the only thing I put Kid A above OK Computer on is the fact that it is more, it flows better than any Radiohead album they made. I mean, you can just listen start to finish and it feels like almost one song. I mean, the flow through is crazy. So he's wrong about that. Right about the placement, just because I guess
No,
this is where it gets a
number
little
one.
bit subjective here. Is if you like the darkness, if you like the atmosphere Kid A creates, the gloominess, the long jet, like you gotta like fight through 3 minutes of a song to get these incredible endings, which Cole loves. We know he loves long songs that take a while to build up that pressure. If you love that, you're probably gonna put this album at number one. If you want something a
Radiohead
bit
don't
more
really make
interesting
long
throughout,
songs.
well, it's not long, but he was right when he says like these songs are not for people who are impatient. He's right. This is there's build up processes to on these songs. So
The only
I'll
other
say he's right
thing,
about that.
the only other thing I'll disagree with him about is I really don't consider this to be all that experimental of an album. Outside of maybe you can maybe argue that there's two experimental songs on this album, but that's 2 out of 10. I mean,
It's
that's
a
not doesn't make this whole album experimental rock. I think this is like pretty straightforward ambient and art rock. I don't really understand, like, people have this huge criticism of Kid A where it's like, "Oh, it's not nearly as experimental as people think it is. It's not, it's not that I'm like, is it trying to be? I've never gotten that it's trying to be crazy experimental. I just feel like
it
it's
is.
art rock and ambient rock done
It sounds
incredibly well.
so much different than most of their discography, though.
That does not make it experimental.
Noah, did you have any other points you wanted to make?
Yeah, I disagree with his him talking about the cohesion. It is the most cohesive Radiohead album. I will give it that. Also, not big on the tree finger slander going on.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
that
know
song
about
is
that. That
beautiful.
song
I
is
love
great.
that song. That song is gorgeous.
He's just
And
wrong about that.
I feel like the album can only be considered experimental if you're looking at it through being experimental for a rock band. Because I feel like in the grand scheme of music in general, this is not experimental at all.
I feel like it's a masterpiece based on his own merit, regardless of whether or not it's experimental.
Yeah,
Like,
it
it
doesn't
doesn't
have to
it
be
doesn't
proven to
need
be
to be
good.
experimental
Yeah.
for it to get the acclaim that it's gotten. I don't think it because I don't think it is experimental.
Okay.
Outside of maybe the title track.
We have argued about the experimental part of
Well,
Kid A lot, so
yeah.
we don't need to
Well,
continue about that. But I was gonna say, well, no, finish your last point.
and the placement is wrong. This is number 2.
No, he
Actually,
got the
number
placement
one.
right. Although
It's
It's
a
actually
good
number
shot.
one.
I'll have to go back and forth on this because I put this at 2 for the Joria time until I heard In Rainbows again. Then I put Rainbows above it, so we'll see. I did see Cosmic. You asked a question about why we're reviewing Fantano, or sorry, what Fantano deserved, how Fantano deserved to get his big bass, or what makes him a music critiquer, I
He
guess.
listens to more music than fucking anybody.
I think
man.
the answer is probably he just knows a lot of music and he's listened to a lot of it.
Yeah,
That's
years
what
I think
and
people-
years of doing this.
I think people. I mean, this is the case for me. I don't want to speak for other people, but it would be my running theory as to why he gets the attention he does. Is because people want to get into music, and when you want to get into anything, you go somewhere where people know a lot about that stuff. And YouTube is a massive platform, and if you want to get into music and you go on YouTube, this guy knows more fucking music on YouTube than almost anybody. So he's kind of
I think it probably
the
says a lot
library.
when you have you don't just stick to one genre or one type. He does, from what I've seen, all genres, all types, and he'll even do big brand new albums. Sometimes he'll do tiny albums. It's like he'll go all over the place. So I think people respect the choices. And Rainbow.
I knew he was gonna do it. I fucking knew it.
Mm-hmm. We're here.
Facts,
In
actually.
Rainbows. This album
No,
is probably not landing this high on most lists of this kind, but honestly,
probably
truly, this album is
now it
and
is.
continues to be a personal favorite of mine in Radiohead's discography. In Rainbows is a lot of things for me. It's Radiohead's most visceral, exciting, consistently explosive album. It's an album where Radiohead, 10 years after releasing easily their biggest record, are proving that they still very much got it. A lot of the ideas on this album might sound pretty similar to some of the tracks on Hail to the Thief, but it's my opinion that Radiohead went on to perfect those sounds on this record, because there are tons of moments on this record where the band is using these grooves, using this energy to reach these just bubbling points, these boiling points, these orgasmic peaks of sonic bliss.
Wow, somebody else
Jigsaw
using that,
falling into
not just
place,
me.
for example. And also, this record has an amazing flow from the kind of scattered.
See, that's
Does
a big
it?
disagreeing point. I don't
It
agree with
is.
that at all.
It is
beats
a
at the
loose
very
collection
start
of
the
great
song 15
songs.
Step to the dreary pianos on videotape. This is a watertight 10 tracks without a single lull.
Almost.
There's so many exciting
Yeah,
highs
no
and
lulls, I agree.
passionate
Almost.
emotional lows on this album. The track Body Snatchers, Radiohead has not sounded this raw since Pablo Honey. And the song Nude is probably in
Overloved.
my top 5 of Radiohead songs ever.
That's
This
such a
track
great
is
idea.
just
No, it's not. It's
just
properly rated.
gorgeous, beautiful, tear, inducing, alien soul. Tom York's vocal performance here is one of his oddest, but also one of his most beautiful. What's even more amazing is that the band had been sitting on this song for such a long time. It only took this album for them to end up recording it and releasing it. The song Reckoner sounds like the band
That's
trying to write
the best song on this
a
album.
trip-hop ballad from the ground
remember
up.
correctly.
Tom's nasal croons are heart-wrenchingly sad. And even one of the
That's
tiniest
a good way to
moments on this
describe it.
record, Faust Arp, seems to
Awful.
just have a
I mean, not
incredible amount
awful,
of
but
Shut the fuck
certainly
up.
such an overrated song.
You
I
just
love the
don't think
fingerpick
before you talk
guitars
sometimes.
on this track.
Awful.
Awful
Shut up.
is wrong, but awful take
Boring.
he's about to give here.
Vocals.
You-
With these two things,
unnecessary.
Radiohead manages
Yes.
to
Good
strike
take.
a great balance between being kind of folky, intimate, beautiful, and creepy. And for me, it's
Good
still
take.
so hard to listen to this record and think about it being 10 years old at this point, because it still sounds to me so crisp and exotic and colorful and exciting. And that's why it's landing so high on this list.
Great. I'll just say the biggest thing I disagree with that he said 100% is it does not flow like the best flow on. No, that is just wrong. He had the opposite criticism on Kid A. I think Kid A flows far better than In Rainbows does. I think there's songs like Faust Arp and other ones that just
Stop.
do not lend to the same credence level. Like he was talking about, like the flow between I don't even remember the song names, but one's dreary and then one's more groovy. That's not flowing. That's the opposite of flowing. But then again,
flows.
I do agree with the placement though.
It flows well. It actually flows their second best.
No. Even though I do agree that it is their second best album, I disagree with what he is. I would flip 1 and 3, but I mean, I love this album. I think it's a masterpiece, but it is sonically all over the place, and it doesn't. It just doesn't feel anywhere near as cohesive as like what I think, as like OK Computer or Kid A do. Even though I think it's better than OK Computer because the songs are just way more memorable.
It is. Can I please say something?
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry. I need to get this thought off my head. So this Faust Arpade feels so incredibly
I don't hate it.
pretentious.
I
It
don't
feels
hate
so
it.
disgustingly pretentious because people call it unfinished just because it's a lot more intimate and there's less things going on. So people instantly just shove it away. It's a great song. The hate on that song is so.
You are overrating the shit out of that
No,
song.
you called it bad. You're delirious. Be quiet.
Calling it bad was like just a
I
hyperbole.
just-
It's not bad. It's just nowhere. I mean, some people say like that song is like one of the best on the album, and that's insanity.
Nobody said
it's
that.
Insanity. I saw someone say it earlier. It's insanity. Like people,
It's a good song.
it's overrated as fuck by In Rainbows.
It's
fans.
actually overhated.
No.
The only thing else I'll say about Faust Arp is every time I listen to the whole album, it feels like it comes to a screeching halt in terms of quality, and it feels like it's so much weaker than all the other songs on the album, like significantly weaker.
100%.
Every time it comes on, I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna skip this. I'm bored, and I don't really care.
The top.
All right, let's get his bad opinion out of the way.
list.
Number 1 for Fantano. Okay, Computer. Computer.
Only one option
Agreed.
left.
Yeah, sure. This
No,
might be a
it has
popular
shitter happier
number
on
one
it.
pick for a lot of other lists, but I do truly feel that speaking purely from the experience
on
of an
Faustarp.
album experience,
Number one has fitter happier.
OK Computer is the closest Radiohead has come to perfection. I do think the album is a little overhyped in the grander scheme of things. I don't think it's one of the greatest pieces of music ever conceived by man, but I do think it's the greatest album in the band's discography, and certainly a crowning achievement for rock music in the 90s, because this album is such an interesting sound for rock music at this time. It's not super raw or punky or grungy like a lot of the albums were being released in this decade. Instead, it's really pristine, it's clean, it's vivid, it's almost a futuristic take on rock music. And in a way, it actually was. I think to a degree, this album was the most predictive album in Radiohead's discography, as it would go on to influence the Muses and the Coldplays and the Killers of the world, which maybe not everybody's happy about.
Right.
But I think that's a small price to pay for such a fantastic record. But it's kind of that pristine, immaculate, almost spotless sound of this album that I think is part of what makes it sound so timeless, because there's not really anything about it that kind of hooks it into, hey, here's this weird, dumb, gimmicky trend that everybody was doing at this time. In that sense, it kind of reminds me of an album like Pink Floyd's The Wall. It's just fundamentals, that what this album is doing is most likely never going to go out of style. The production on this thing, it's so great. It's so rich. It's so detailed. There's such good instrumental balance on these songs. The groovy riffs on Paranoid Android sound fantastic. The distortion is so burning, it's so fiery. And the blissful, jangly let down sounds like the band inadvertently wrote the instrumental blueprint for almost half of the post-rock songs to be released in the 2000s. The rest of the record brings an amazing range of interesting emotions and sounds and lyrical concepts. There are tracks on here where Tom York is exploring what seems to be this strong sense of loneliness and isolation, these feelings of being alien. Karma Police remains to be one of Radiohead's most catchy tracks, but also hilariously sinister tracks too when you read into the lyrics. And while this record is not as consistently visceral or as explosive as some other tracks in the band's discography, they definitely build tension. They definitely take their time. There are a lot of subtle, sad, dreary moments on this record. But when the band finally hits you with a payoff, it fucking pays off. Albums like this are the reason that people describe music as having an orgasm-like quality to it. Like at the very end of the song, Exit Music, and No Surprises still stands, in my opinion, as one of the most fantastically beautiful songs in Radiohead's entire discography. I love the lullaby quality guitar lead and the pretty little glockenspiel. I mean, the track is really a combination of what sounds like someone kind of gently trying to put you to sleep, but also a little bit of Velvet Underground and maybe a touch of musical theater too. And going off from the musical theater,
two things I don't like.
This album's really dramatic.
Okay, I think we get its point. Yeah, so first of all, I obviously had OK Computer as their number one. I was the only one here who did. I agree with pretty much everything he said, especially about the songs. I think that the peaks of this, and I gave 3 10s on this album. The peaks of this, and then the overall consistency throughout. While it may have some dips, like a couple dips in there, the peaks overweigh the dips compared to every other album Radiohead put out. And because of that, I go back to OK Computer more than any other Radiohead album. By far. The singles, the songs. I will go and listen to OK Computer before I listen to In Rainbows, Kid A. I mean, I'd only heard of Moonshaped Pool yesterday, and I'll probably listen to it again soon. But I go back to this album because the peaks are so much funner to listen to, or just interesting to listen to, that I have to give credit where credit is due. I mean, I agree with what he said. It's probably their best work in terms of how much music enjoyment you get out of it.
Okay. He overglazed the shit out of this one. And he didn't bring up a couple tracks I'd love to bring up right now.
Go ahead.
First off, Fitter Happier.
Shocking.
Right there. Honestly, could take it out of the conversation.
No.
Airbag. That song's pretty overrated.
Airbag's great.
Actually, no, it's okay. Electioneering. No,
Great.
thank you.
Overhated. The Faust
Lucky.
harp of OK Computer.
The
Okay,
Faust harp
don't
of
even
OK
compare.
Computer would be Fitter Happier.
Yeah, except Faust Harp's actually musical. Lucky. You probably couldn't
Good
even
song.
remember that song. No,
Like I said,
go. Tell me something about Lucky.
There are dips in this album, and I admitted that, but the peaks overweigh the dips.
Yeah, it's a good album. I'm not saying it's not a good album. I'm just saying it's not the best.
Way outweigh the dips, like extremely outweigh it.
Yeah, it's a good album.
No, it's
not their
great
best
album.
Yeah, it's a great album.
But they don't have a
Sure.
perfect album. So this is as good as it gets.
Actually, no,
I
it's
would argue
not.
Kid A is perfect.
No.
Kid A and Rainbows are much closer to perfect than this is.
No, they're not.
Yep. Yes,
Yep.
they are.
No, they are not. All right. Well, anyway,
Yes, they
we're
are.
supposed to be talking about his reaction, so keep it to that.
I mean, the criticism of OK Computer that I've always had, and why it always lands at probably around number 3 for me, and that he doesn't really bring up here at all, is I just don't think Tom York is anywhere near as good vocally as he would become on Kid A or in Rainbows. I think there's a lot of moments where his vocals on OK Computer genuinely kind of irritate me, like on the song Airbag, or like 30 seconds of the song Paranoid Android. Even though that's an amazing song, there's still vocal moments that I think he's kind of not great in. And Fitter Happier is an utter waste of time, and I don't really think they do a great job with the style of music that they're trying to do on Electioneering.
Well, I'll say this about his rankings. I think I agree with the top 3, and then everything else outside of that. No, he had the top 4 because he had Moonshaped Pool at 4, I believe. So I'll give him the top 4. Outside of that,
You
completely
just
disagree.
twinsies.
Yep. You agreed the most.
You ever disagree with this guy?
Oh my
Honestly.
gosh. All right. Well, anyway,
Little butt buddies.
That was our Anthony Fantano Radiohead worst to best discography reaction. For the most part, I think you two disagreed with him almost entirely.
Yep.
Is there anything you guys agreed about?
I think he had a lot. I mean,
Amnesiac.
his reasons for why, like his critiques and compliments for the albums, I agree with for the most part. But he had a pretty good bottom half of the list.
Yeah.
Like I don't think there was anything that was like more than a spot or 2 away from where I would put it.
Amnesiac.
It was okay.
Or, sorry, no.
I mean,
Hail to the Thief was way too high.
Hail to the Thief was accurate, actually.
No.
Yeah, it's their 5th best album.
All right, so you guys, so was there anything that you was there anything you agreed with?
He went 1 for 9. He
9.
got Amnesiac right. I disagree with his placements. Like Cole said,
I agree.
He speaks a lot of truth in the critiques and dislikes of the albums. I just cannot stand where he puts them.
Fair enough. I went 4 for 9 with him. I don't think we
Yep,
agreed on the
shocker.
first half. The second half, I far more agree with on it, but that is what it is. All right, well, that's our Anthony Fantano Radiohead worst to best reaction. I hope you guys did enjoy. Let us know in the comments down below. Do you enjoy these types of videos? We're gonna do one more when we finish the Pink Floyd discography or the studio albums, except for Endless River. We're gonna do one more of this. He has done a Pink Floyd worst to best recently, and we're going to react to that as well. Yes, if you enjoy these, let us know in the comments down below if you want to see us do more reactions to Mr. Fantano or other music reviewers that you guys might link. Let us know. And hit subscribe, hit the bell to get notified when we go live. We did this one live, and we're going to keep doing them live. Thank you guys so much for watching. Join our Discord, join our YouTube. All links in the description below, and we'll see you guys in the next video.